Okay, um, here what we're looking at is 5 U.S.C. Section 556, and this has to do with administrative hearings and powers and duties of burden of proof in administrative proceedings. Well, what is a collection due process hearing? It's an administrative proceeding. So the part that I think is important about this is down here in subsection D. It reads, except as otherwise provided by statute, the proponent of a rule or order has a burden of proof. Well, they want a levy, so the burden's on them. Is basically so. And then look at this: a sanction may not be imposed or rule or order issued except on consideration of the whole record or those parts thereof cited by a party and supported by in accordance with reliable, probative, and substantial evidence. Well, in the last video on collection due process sample hearing request forms, I talked about the fact that that we wanted to cite a lot of authority. And then the way we keep the burden on them is cite the authority and then ask them a question. That's what I'm convinced is the best way to do that. And a party is entitled to present his case or defense by oral or documentary evidence. Now, there's been a lot of issues raised about whether or not you want to have a face-to-face hearing. They don't want you to have a face-to-face hearing because that's when you show up with recorders and witnesses and you want to see their IDs and all that stuff, and they don't like any of that. So they're trying to avoid face-to-face hearings because they want to just rule that everything's frivolous, call you up on the phone, and tell you had your hearing over the phone and call it good. But here's the thing: in this package is authority to support the concept that when the court reviews it, in other words, the whole point of doing this whole thing is to get them to rule in your favor initially. If you can't do that, then to appeal. And when you go up on appeal, you've got to have a record that can be reviewed by the court. And you don't want the record that they review to be a schlocky collection due process hearing request, or you don't want to have insufficient evidence in the record that so that you can't win. So I'm convinced that really what you want to do is you get the collection due process hearing request in so that you can get collections suspended, stop the levy. Then what you want to do is you want to start stacking the record. You want to start sending a bunch of stuff to the appeals officer. And when you read some of the authorities in this package, you'll find out that error has been made in the past by other people where they didn't build a record. Instead, what was allowed to happen was the collections hearing officer built a record against them. You really don't want a face-to-face hearing. What you want is you want to make a record in writing that can be reviewed by the court. Because, okay, so let's say that you went to this hearing and you took a tape recorder and you made a tape recording. Now what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to, since they don't have any provision as part of this collection due process hearing process, they don't have a provision for preserving a record of what was said at the hearing, then that means that now you've got to make a transcription. You've got to prove your transcription was correct, and you've got to figure out some way to get that, in front of the appeals hearing officer. They're trying not to let it in because they want to fudge the record and do whatever they want with it. And so it just seemed to me like it was better to build a record in the appeals office in writing. And what that does is that gives you an opportunity to put in as much as you want, to raise as many issues as you want. There's nothing that says that after you send in your notice of hearing request that you can't continue to put in more stuff in writing.